Okay.
Welcome, Chris, to the Engineer Whisperer podcast, transitioning into a director role. I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I'm so excited to ask you lots of questions about your transition. But first, give us a brief introduction about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm Chris Shaffer. I live in Redmond, Washington, the home base of Microsoft, which is where I worked for almost 34 years until recently. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end, probably. But I did a lot of things while I was at Microsoft. I was in testing, test management, moved to director of test. That's what we're going to talk about today. And really, over the course of my career, I identified my passion, my purpose, which is to create environments where individuals and teams are empowered to learn and grow and realize their full potential. And so that's what I'm about. That's what I try to do in every job that I have, and even at home and in any kind of environment that I'm working in with other people. I try to create that environment, whether it's one-on-one or in a larger context, where everybody can realize their full potential. Fun fact about me, I have a Grogu doll that has his own Instagram account, and so I take him around. It's Grogu.out and about, and I take him places locally as well as overseas, and take pictures of him and post. So that's a fun little social media thing that keeps me off the streets at night.
Cool. Well, you're gonna give me the link so I can put it in the podcast notes.
Sure.
That sounds like fun. I had a friend who similarly did something and traveled with an item, and it was fun in Europe. So awesome. Well, let's jump right in. Tell me about your transition into the director role, and let's start with what came easy to you.
Yeah. So when I started at Microsoft, I was a software development engineer in test. So it's a technical person with coding skills, but we were testing. I worked on Windows 3.0. I worked on Windows 3.1. So I tested the technical parts of that system. And then I moved over to a team called AFX. They created the first version of the Microsoft Foundation classes, MFC. And I worked on a thing called App Studio, which is a resource editor. So I was testing things. I became a manager of people. And then I eventually moved to what would become the Visual C++ team, the programming language C++, and I was the test manager of that. And then when I moved to director, so I had had many years of quality assurance and testing and managing smaller teams. And when I moved to be a director, I was the director of test for both the Visual C++ team and the C# team. So the C# language that we created. And so that was my shift into director role. And the thing that was easy for me about that was that I had been doing testing and quality assurance for so many years at that point that my director role, my transition, was in the same context of testing and quality assurance. So what was easy is to manage a larger effort across multiple product units around testing because it was my area of expertise.
Yeah, it was familiar to you.
That's right. And because my superpower is systems thinking, I think and see in systems. I see patterns and connections between disparate sets of data. And so the other thing that was easy for me is that as the complexity of the work that I was doing across multiple product units got more complex as a system, because two organizations are more complex than one, that came easier to me because it's my superpower. I don't even know at the time if I realized that that was my superpower. I was just doing things, right? It's only over the years of reflecting that I can now identify and name that particular superpower. So those would be a couple of things that were easier for me in my transition to director.
Anything else?
Um, I think because I'd worked closely with a lot of the people that were on sort of the teams that I became over, and I'd worked in that product cycle, um, the relationships with the people made it easier, right? Again, to be promoted into or step into a director role of people that you're unfamiliar with, technology that you're unfamiliar with. systems, process that you're unfamiliar with. I mean, all of these things, any one of those things would make it more difficult. And none of those things were new to me. So so it was a pretty familiar and I would say safe sort of move. That doesn't mean it didn't come without its challenges, but I would say that because I'd worked with all those people and on those products, it made it easier to manage the whole thing.
So I'm curious, before you got that role, was that something that you planned on getting to, or were you invited as a high performing manager to then manage other leaders? So
Yeah,
a director
it's
role.
yeah, because I'd been managing managers prior to that, and some people might define the director as going from an IC, you know, from being a manager of ICs to
Mhm.
managing managers, and I had stepped into that previously, and so this was really just more of the same. I was open to more responsibility. I don't remember that I was really clamoring for it. I think I was invited into it. It reminds me of when I first became a manager, a frontline manager, because I like to say I was tricked into becoming a manager. And here's the story. I was working on the operating system team in Windows and I wanted to change. And so I interviewed with the AFX team, as I mentioned, and I interviewed, they liked me, they said, hey, we'd like to hire you. But like I didn't know I was hiring for or interviewing for a manager position. They didn't say anything. I was just interviewing with the team and they said, we need you to be a manager. I said, I don't want to be a manager. I'm not interested in being a manager. I didn't think I was. And they said, well, we've got two people that need to be managed. It should be easy. And we see in you, this is a theme from my career as well. We see something in you that we believe in you. And so just do it for 6 months. And if you don't like it at the end of 6 months, you can move to an individual contributor role. And I'm thinking to myself, I can put up with this for 6 months and just, you know,
Mhm.
bear it and
Yep.
then get back to doing the work, doing the important work. And so I'm like, sure, okay, whatever. So I managed these two people and discovered that I have a passion for people and teams. That's really what started it. And so, you know, after 6 months, I was actually enjoying it. I'm like, you tricked me into becoming a manager. So that would be an example of me not, you know, striving for something, but
Mhm.
somebody seeing something in me that they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and they called it out. And I think as leaders, that is such a an important gift we can give the people in our organization or anybody that we interact with, is to really see them and then call out something where, you know, they may not see it in themselves.
Just like on your end, it's an amazing experience when you are invited into a role, when you are told what you were told, that I see something in you, you can do it, give it a try.
Yeah.
I'll support you. So I was just curious.
Yeah.
So those are awesome things that you're bringing in. I have one more curious question because this comes up sometimes when I work with engineers, that when you are promoted into a higher, more responsible role with more responsibilities within your team, within the people that you know and you worked with, sometimes it's actually challenging to do that because now the new boundaries have to be set. So you mentioned that was easy for you. So give me a story, a few examples of how you made that easy, because as I said, for some people that is very challenging.
Yeah, well, that particular dynamic that you're talking about with the people, I wouldn't say that part was easy. Knowing the people and having
Ah,
relationships with them certainly could make it a little more difficult to now manage them if you were peers with them, right? There's that kind of a situation that's common. And you know, if my style was more authoritarian and less sort of peer relationship oriented, um, then it would have been more difficult. And so I think that helped make it easier. But there are certainly complexities or challenges um, to managing people that you used to be peers with or that you had a different relationship with. And I think, like any challenging situation, if we are open and vulnerable with what we're struggling with and sharing that with other people, asking for their help, kind of working through it together, then I find that is easier than taking a know-it-all stance. We'll talk about know-it-alls in a second here. Taking a know-it-all stance where I got to figure it all out myself, and I'm not asking for other people to help participate in crafting a solution that works for everybody. Well, you've just put so much pressure on yourself that you almost create some of the difficulty in that particular approach.
Yeah, very isolating and restrictive that way. Well, tell me more. Tell me more about your challenges. How did you manage through them and what were they?
Yeah. So the one of the things that was challenging in moving up into director was related to the scope increase, where I had, one product I was responsible for previously, the testing and quality assurance for, and now there was two whole products that were about equal in size. And so because the thing that feeds my superpower, systemic thinking, is
Mhm.
data and information. I am a detail-oriented, former perfectionist, working on that. And so I had the capacity to keep all of the details and the data and be involved, not micromanaging, but be involved and aware of the data and information and details for one product. When I scaled out to two products, I didn't have the capacity in my head to do that. So that was a challenge, to find ways to continue to get enough information to feed my superpower, to be able to add the value that that systems thinking gives me, that I can give back to the organization without my head exploding from so many details and not being able to keep track of it all. So that was challenging in finding the subset of information across a larger system that I needed to pick from. And I think there were certainly examples or times when I said, okay, this is the set of data I'll rely on. And then some of it worked and some of it didn't. Okay, what was it about the information and what was I missing? Right. So it was an iterative process of refining how to deal with the increased scope and amount of details. So that was one challenge for sure.
Was there another one? You
Uh,
set
you
it
know,
you set it up for me.
yeah, I didn't know if you had more curious questions about
Well,
that particular.
I do actually. So how did you overcome? How did you find that system? Because you said, yeah, nobody wants their head to explode. I'm totally with you there. So what did you find? Share with
Yeah,
us.
it was really, and again, this was in the early days of software development. So it was in the waterfall stages. And I'm sure you've talked to other guests about, waterfall versus agile. And so agile was not really a thing at that point yet. It wasn't practiced really very much at Microsoft. But when I reflect back on what I was doing, I was using an agile approach to try this set of data and then have some success and failure, quickly evaluate that, adjust the data that I was, paying attention to, letting into my head versus ignoring, and sort of iterating on that as I worked through getting what's the right set of data, subset of data that I can rely on. So
Mm.
I think utilizing an agile method, before, I probably wouldn't even have been able to name what I was doing at the time. It was more of an intuitive thing. And then over the years, it's certainly become a much more common engineering practice at Microsoft and
I'm
other.
curious, did you find that agile method even though you didn't call it that way, or did someone show it to you? So did you learn it from someone or did you discover it yourself?
I think it was just natural for me on that particular item. I wouldn't say that I then went to advocate, agile across the development cycle. And the practices for the engineering team were pretty established at that point. And so certainly there was opportunities to tweak and improve the existing practice, but to scrap it all and say, we're going to operate this way with
Yeah.
Agile was a multi-year, over a decade of sort of getting to the point where teams, were willing to do that. And certainly smaller startup teams with a new product were in a position to try something brand new versus an established product that had, multiple cycles going on and shipping and commitments. And so it was, a lot of pressure on that. So it was harder, would have been harder to advocate that.
So I love how you were ahead of the times and the methods.
Now that you say it,
And
I guess, yeah, I guess I was.
and because that points to, and one of the other strengths that I hear as you're sharing is this part of intuition that you rely on it, you use it, and you have developed uh, a system of how to use your intuition. And I think that being ahead of things, it's a result of you listening to this intuition, this voice. So
Yeah, and there's an
everyone,
element of just trying it. Try something and see what happens. What do you learn from it, right? As opposed to coming up with a perfect solution. And by the time you've come up with it, and by the way, it won't be perfect anyway, even though you think it is, then you've missed the opportunity, right? It's taken so long. And so I feel like in smaller ways, if we all just take a little risk, we got an idea, try something, get some information, what do we learn from it? And being okay with failure. Certainly if look at my passion statement about helping individuals and teams learn and grow, learning and the science of learning and how people learn is a huge part of my passion, who I am now, of what I'm focused on. And so I think even in the example of what I did, what I shared, there is that learning cycle that was going on. So yeah,
yeah.
that's
And I love how it's integrated with your superpower. You try something, you get a little data, and then you're all about data. So it's
yeah,
bringing it, you're funneling things into your superpower where it's your superpower, you know how to use it. So
yeah, that's
everybody
true.
listening, just the intricate parts are all playing together like a Swiss clock, the inside of a Swiss clock.
Yeah.
That's
And then
really fun.
the other challenge that I thought of is related to people. So you talked a little bit, or asked me a little bit about, that scaling up challenge of managing a larger team. And with those products, and then sort of subsequent to that, I built the brand as the guy who fixed broken teams. And I will share with you my secret if you promise not to tell anybody else. Of course, we're recording this, so everybody will know I'm being tongue in cheek here. I just cared for the people a little bit. And I'm only half joking when I say it like that. It didn't take very much. And what I started to discover when I was tricked into being a manager, was that I actually was more passionate about people than I am about technology. It's not that I'm not passionate about technology. I was just more passionate about people. And so how that manifested itself was in the teams that I led, I truly cared for the people. And I paid attention to them, and I listened to them, and all the things that are all in vogue today, and has been discovered as being key to success. But this was way back when it was all about the technology. So I was sort of unique in that regard. And when I moved to director, when I had smaller teams, really focusing on the people and the culture and the environment for the people so that they could all thrive, was easier. And when I had a larger team with more people, more diversity, that was a challenge. It was a challenge to figure out, how do I create this environment that every individual can thrive within, when I don't have the ability to know every person as deeply as I did before, to be able to know what makes them tick, what's their passions, right? How could we customize the roles so they can fill into their passions, and empower them fundamentally, right?
Yeah.
So that certainly was a challenge in moving into director role.
So Chris, give me an example of a system that you put in place, because it sounds like that maybe that would have been a solution that you put in place to deal with that scaling of of now a larger team, because we all
Yeah.
have 24 hours. And if you have more people who want to have even just one-on-ones with you or want to give you some feedback, you know, how did you shift that to still give to people and take care of the people and care for the people?
Well, certainly I worked really closely with and I hired very carefully each of the managers on my team, because ultimately they are running their own little teams that all have to interact with each other. And they're the ones that have the responsibility and the time to spend with their direct reports. And so really pouring into my direct reports, my leadership team, um, and equipping them, empowering them, coaching them to do that kind of work and think about their people in ways that might be different than what they were seeing going on in other organizations, and encouraging them to be vulnerable and to do the right thing for each of their people and balance that with the business needs. So we're running a business here. We're shipping software. That's the point, right? And so it's not about all about people at the exclusion of the business and technology. It has to be in balance. And so I think I spent a lot of time with my direct reports. One of the systems that I think is a great example of scaling and empowering the people that I created. And as of a couple of years ago, decades later, I discovered that it was still in place in one part of the company. So that was an amazing thing. Was what I called yellow sticky exercise, and and it was a process around reorganizations. Now, Microsoft loved, still so, but not as much as maybe in the early days, loved to reorganize constantly, right? And you hear people talking about how many managers they've had and how many reorgs they've gone through. So this was common enough to say, what's the opportunity to do it in a way that's better, that's more in alignment with what I described at scale. Because if you have just a small team and you're reorganizing, everyone gets in a room and you talk about it and everyone's involved, and right, when you have a large organization,
Right.
hundreds of people. And so what I did was, because a lot of times the way reorgs would go is that upper management would decide a reorg needs to happen. So they'd go off in a room and they'd decide how the new reorg was going to go and what everyone was going to do. And then, I think about it like, picking a new pope, right? They go off in a room and then smoke comes out the stack. And all of a sudden, from on high, the
Ew,
tablets come down, here's your new org and your new role. And everybody's like
what
pissed
just
about it.
happened?
And even if what they got assigned was exactly what they wanted to do, or maybe what they were doing before, they had no choice. They had no agency in that. So what I started to do on the smaller teams, and it was a bit of a sell to managers of other teams to try this, but because we'd had so much success, they did, was that we decided we needed a reorg. We'd let the team know. We would decide how we wanted to structure the team, right? How many feature teams we needed, what were the skills we needed on each team, and
Okay.
we would create a blank org chart, and we would get everybody into a room, the whole organization, and everybody would get a yellow sticky with their name on it, which is where the name of the exercise, the yellow sticky exercise.
Ah,
And then all at once we said, okay, go up to the board and put your sticky where you want to work. And everybody in the room got to choose their job for the exercise. And so everyone would go up. Some people would go up immediately. Other people would hold back a little bit and see,
yeah.
so-and-so going to work. I'd like to work for that person. What team are they going to lead? So I'm going to
Yeah.
put myself there. I don't want to work
Uh-huh.
for this person. And everyone would stick their stickies up and we would all take a step back and we would ask a question to the room. Can we move forward with this organization? Can we ship with this org? And inevitably, there'd be two people in one manager spot. There'd be a feature team that was empty, right? With a lead over it, which is interesting information, by the way, right? If a
Mhm.
lead puts their name somewhere and nobody wants to work there, Do they not want to work on the technology, or do they not want to work
And
with the
work then.
manager?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
information. You don't know the answer to that question, but it's useful data. And usually we would say, okay, everybody go up, take your stickies down. Let's try it again, because that's not going to work. Think about how you might want to adjust. And we do it 2 or 3 times until it got close. And one of the things we were clear about is that if you put your sticky up, it didn't guarantee that that was your job. You still had to have a conversation with the manager of that team, or if you were putting in a manager spot,
Oh, I
etc.
see.
And a lot of times someone would stick their name in a manager spot as a way to express a desire to become a manager. And they might
Oh.
not have the skills. And so that would provide the opportunity to have a great conversation with that person to say, I see you're interested in being a manager. That's not going to work right now, but because you've expressed interest, let's give you some opportunities to build those skills over time so you can become a manager.
Ah, so the sticky note wasn't just because in my mind I thought, oh, if I'm in this role, I'm just gonna pick a similar role to this. But you're saying that I could have expressed that I wanted to go.
Anywhere. You can go anywhere. I want to
Ah,
work on another one. I just started on this feature
that
team one
is,
product cycle ago, and I want
yeah,
to
it's
work on it again.
fascinating. That's fascinating because you
And
get
I
so much data from the whole organization. So it's so effective.
and
Wow.
everybody was empowered. Everyone had a choice. And for the few people, and it really was just a handful,
Yes.
that, we have too many strong people on this feature team. We have a lot of new people on this one. You go to 1 or 2 of the strong people and say, we really need your help over here. Would you
Mm-hmm.
mind?
Yeah.
And most of the time they'd be like, yeah, I'd be happy to provide leadership over here rather than be caught up in a small pool of strong people trying to fight for attention. And so the way I like to say it, Johnny Carson, an old talk show host, used to have this sketch for Karnak, the wise or whatever, and he'd have an envelope with the answer in it, and he'd try to divine the answer. And I
Oh.
told leaders, I said, if you created an org chart that you would have gone into a room and created without people, without their input, and you stuck it in an envelope and you sealed it, and then you ran this exercise. When you were done with the exercise, if you opened up that envelope and compared it to what the people chose, it would be 80 to 95% exactly what you would have chosen. But the difference is the people were empowered. They chose.
Yeah.
And the tweaks, oftentimes the things that were different were actually better than what you would have chosen. Oh, I never would have thought that person would have
True.
been willing to go over and lead that team. They really needed their leadership. This is better because the
Yeah.
people know. And so the final call still sat with the managers, but they made very few changes. And so we reorged often enough that this was a process I put in place that the people loved and management learned to love over time, because it was scary
I love that.
releasing that authority or that power to the team.
Yes.
And that's just an example of the kind of thing that I did that worked at scale, because we did it with hundreds, multiple product units and stuff, hundreds of people in a room, and it worked, and it's still in use in some parts of the company today. So I'm pretty proud of that particular process as an example of how you can empower the team and work with people at scale to create great organizations.
Mm, sounds like a great process. I can just imagine the energy, the vibration in the room while this exercise is happening. So, yes, very empowering, literally.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move to a different aspect, or maybe it's similar. I don't know. I'm curious. Was there something that surprised you as you
Yeah.
transitioned?
Yeah. So as I thought back on it, I think the thing that surprised me the most was when I kind of got up into the higher levels, and now my peers and the meetings I was in were at a higher level, sort of at a larger scope.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised that they didn't have it all figured out. And, I don't know why that surprised me. I think maybe everyone just figures, they don't know. But you have to keep in mind, this was in the know-it-all days. I said earlier, we're going to get back to that concept,
Oh,
right?
yes.
So under Satya, the current CEO of Microsoft, under his leadership over the last decade or so, he's had a mantra of moving from know-it-alls to learn-it-alls as part of the growth mindset cultural foundation of the company. Okay, so this is back in the day of know-it-alls. So leaders needed to present themselves as knowing it all, even though they didn't, right? So the impression was, oh, they have it all figured out. They're know-it-alls. And, of course, there was a ton of pressure to be a know-it-all as a leader and cover the fact that you don't have it all figured out, right? That vulnerability that's
Yeah.
so important that we know.
Yeah.
And so, so that was that was surprising to me, and it gave me the opportunity to try in my small way in the areas where I had influence to try to start cracking and breaking down that know-it-all mantra and environment, where one of the things that I loved to do, I still do it to this day, and I think it's become more powerful, right? The longer you've been at the company, the more wisdom you have, the more people just assume you know the answers to things. I love being in a meeting with a lot of senior people. That's the best one. And something's going on. I'm looking on people's faces and I can see there's some confusion. And I usually I'll know the answer, right? But I raise my hand. Now, first of all, in a corporate environment, especially one like Microsoft where everyone's talking over each other and stuff like that, they're getting better at that. But I would sit at the table and I would literally raise my hand and I would just hold it there and wait. And a few people would see me like, what are you doing? Like, you don't raise hands like you're in kindergarten or something. And so I just would be patient and wait. And eventually whoever was talking, like couldn't keep talking. They literally it was so disruptive to be the person standing there with your hand raised that they had to stop the meeting to say, you got a question? And I'm like,
Very obvious.
yeah, yeah. And I wasn't pushy. I wasn't, I just waited. And then I would ask the question that was clear to me. There were people in the room who didn't know the answer. And again, usually I would know the answer to the question, but rather than just clarifying, rather than just creating clarity myself, I was showing that, you know what, it's okay to ask questions, even if you're a really senior person with lots of experience. I'm demonstrating vulnerability. It's okay to ask questions, even ones that are maybe pretty simple. And the question would get asked. I'd see people go, oh, that's really helpful. Thank you. You could see their faces. You could see that it was helpful. I would lower my hand. And that's an example of how you can start to break down the know-it-all culture and say, if I don't know something, ask a question. That's how you learn. It's okay. So that would be an example of one of the ways early on and all the way through. I would try to break down the know-it-all culture in leadership.
And introducing that curiosity of curiosity for learning and for vulnerability, that
Mhm.
it's okay to express that you don't know. Because so often, even within executives, that sense of I don't know this and I doubt myself exists, but it's oh, I am so afraid to show that right now. I'm so afraid to let people know that I don't know. So
Well, and as a director and higher, I think it's important for any leadership position, even an individual contributor who is in a leadership position for particular effort. This is important for everybody, but I think
yes.
the impact of it is higher, the higher up you go, is that yes, of course, the fear is that people won't respect you if you don't know everything. That's where know-it-all comes from. And yet, when you don't know something, everybody knows. They can smell that from a mile away, right? So you're
Isn't
not
that
fooling,
funny that
you're
way?
not, yeah, we're not fooling anybody when we pretend like we know. And so you actually earn more respect when you're vulnerable and you say, I don't know the answer to that question, but I will go find out for you. Or, can you help me figure that out or whatever? Let's do it together. And so, yeah, it's a very real thing, that fear, for sure. And, but when you actually take a step back and think about the alternative and the impact it has on people, it's not the impact that you want. And so you want to be respected, right? Every leader wants to do a good job and be respected. So what are the things you can do, no matter how scary they are, no matter how countercultural they might be, cultural as in within your company. Um, it takes bravery, it takes courage to do that. And then as you see other people doing it, that's the thing. As a leader, as a director and hire, you're on stage right now today. Andrea, you're on stage here. But
I
as a
know.
leader, we're on stage and people are watching. And so what you model, right? If you say the right words, but do your actions speak otherwise, you're also not going to have any respect. So it's so important that we
Mhm.
model the behaviors that we want to see from our teams.
Yeah.
That's where the curiosity, the vulnerability, and all of these things come from that are going to make you a better leader. People are going to follow you more wholeheartedly, and you're going to have a more effective organization, a more productive organization.
Yeah. I in the same believer that the benefits outweigh the fear. So go for it. Others
Yeah.
have done it before you too. And if you just need someone to talk with, to role model it, find that person. Even if you're at that level, go find an ally, go find a mentor, someone who can walk you through how they've done it. Maybe how part of this podcast is for others to be inspired by your journey and your stories and say, okay, somebody has done it before me. They survived. I'm okay going to do it too. So,
Yeah, for sure.
yes,
And I would
yes.
say also, Simon Sinek gives this advice to young, early in career folks who see a leader that they don't respect, right? That isn't behaving this way, and they're like, "What can I do? I don't have any
Oh,
influence from where I'm sitting." And his encouragement, which I 100% agree with, is be the leader that you want to see, right? Show up in whatever role, in whatever influence you have in the way that you want to see your leaders behaving. And your skip level, the people that are way farther up the chain, they may not see you, but your manager is going to see you. Other people in your sphere of influence are going to see you. You'll impact them. They'll show up differently, and it starts to trickle upwards that way. It doesn't happen overnight, right? It's a long game, right? It's a slow
yes.
investment, but that would be my advice, for earlier career folks, is that if you're not seeing the kind of thing that we're talking about here, you shouldn't just give up hope. You can do something. Like, what's under your control, how you show up, what can you model for those around you, and you will have an impact.
That's great. Great advice. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And I'm a fan of Simon as well. So let's close maybe um, with focusing a little bit what transition are you going through right now? And would you like to share with us about
Yeah.
that?
So we could probably talk in a whole hour on this, and we won't, because we don't have that kind of time. But the transition I'm going through right now is, after 34 years at the company, as part of the need for the company to downsize, my whole team was laid off a year ago. And so really the only job I'd had out of college, um, uh, and now I'm unemployed. And so the transition I'm going through right now is, what's next for me in my career. And, a couple of things that I found really helpful for me as I navigate, and am still navigating this transition, is, first and foremost, Michael Gervais, who has a book, I think, and a course called High Performance Mindset. He's worked with the Seahawks and world-class athletes. One of his principles, that when he studied world-class athletes, that set them apart from really great athletes, but not the best in the world, is that these folks put 0% of their energy into things that are outside their control, and focus 100% of their energy on what is under their control. And that principle, while I understand it, deeply, I'm still working on, but it's a great reminder to say, is angsting over, is getting really upset or obsessing about X, do I have any control over that, right? Is that energy that's just wasted? What is under my control right now? My attitude, what I show up, what I do each day. And so that's been a really helpful grounding principle to say, I didn't have any control over the decision to have my team let go and to be unemployed. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So what do I have control over? Moving forward, making sure, choosing to take a break and relaxing and enjoying my daughter's wedding, and and then getting to the job search thing after that, right? These are choices I made because it was under my control. The second thing that is really, really helpful is we talked about reorganizations earlier, and I call it my Bible for reorganizations is a book called Managing Transitions by William Bridges. It's an older book, but really, really relevant. And he talks about a lot of stuff about managing transitions that I used when I was helping with the reorganizations. But one particular word picture that he uses that I find really, really helpful is around trapeze. And it's the notion of, I've actually done trapeze. In Seattle, there's a place you can go and you can grab the bar and go swing across.
Yes,
And
I heard about it. Yes.
yeah, so it's a lot of fun and it uses muscles in your core you didn't even know you had. So you'll be sore after you're done. So I've done it. But his word picture is that, okay, the handle that you start with is the old thing, your old job, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the new thing is this other handle out here that's way out there. You haven't got it yet. And if it were possible to hang on to the old handle and reach across and grab the new handle, but you don't let go of the old handle, you would be stuck in the
Stuck.
middle. You would be
Yes.
moving. Now, it turns out they don't get close enough together to you actually doing that, right? But the point there is that you have to let go of the old before you can grab a hold of the new. So that's principle number one, is that you have to grieve the loss and let go of that isn't anymore on whatever the change is, whatever the transition is, right? Change happens instantaneously. I'm laid off.
Yep.
The transition is managing that point to the new thing.
Yes.
The most helpful part of this is what they call the neutral zone. Because when you let go of the one trapeze bar, you're sort of flying through the air and you haven't grabbed the new one. And so that's what he calls the neutral zone, which is very scary. It's very uncertain, right? Fear, uncertainty, doubt, all of that stuff is true. So
Yep.
what I'm about to say doesn't make any of that not true. But what exists in the neutral zone is opportunity, because the new thing hasn't been grabbed onto yet. It isn't clear. There is huge opportunity for creativity, for exploration, for experimentation, for trying some things as you try to inform and influence what that new thing is going to be before you grab a hold of it. Instead of being a victim only of like, oh, this is me and it's scary and what am I going to do? You empower yourself, you take agency and you say, I'm going to be creative here. While I deal with the fear, again, that stuff doesn't go away,
No.
but don't miss the opportunity for that creativity in the neutral zone. And that has, been my saving grace in this period of time for me, where I really am exploring. Do I want to do something like what I did before? Do I want to do something completely differently? And that's really kind of kept me going and kept me optimistic in a time that otherwise could be very, very, filled with despair.
Yes, yes. And I love how you're moving your arms for those who are just listening to this podcast. On the video, I can see Chris, because I want you to think about as the trapeze, when you let go of one before you touch the other bar, literally you're holding nothing. And that is scary by itself. Oh, I'm not holding on to anything. And that's that creative space where, oh, I'm not holding on to anything. So I can hold on to everything, everything that I want, because my hands are empty. So I just wanted to point it out. It was beautiful.
Thank you. And it's interesting you point that out, because that is the hand motion that I have very intentionally been using when I talk to people about what's next for me. I say, I don't know, but I'm trying to stay open rather than control what's next for me, because I could do that. I'm being open to whatever possibilities, whatever doors are open to me. And I
Yeah.
just find that this posture of open hands to the world and to the amazing people and friends and network that I have that have been so generous with their time and their connections to help me just to stay open to it, because we're not alone. Sometimes I think engineers, again, with that know-it-all, you feel like you have to know it all and do it all yourself. And we're so much more effective in teams, together, in community. So leveraging other people has been also something that I'm learning how to do, because I can tend to be very independent myself. So I'm working on that.
Well, keeping your opportunities open and your hands open, because it's also that motion of when your hands are open, that's when you receive. If they're
Mhm.
closed, nobody can give you anything.
That's right.
So keep them open, hold them open. I love that body language, uh, showing people that you are open in your mindset, in your expectations, in your letting go, in allowing to something to show up, so to life to show up and really surprise you and be invited somewhere where you haven't thought of. So I wish you all the best and thank you very much for sitting down with me today. I want to give you a chance to maybe close it down. So what would you close this podcast with?
I think because it's so key to how we live our lives, um, my piece of encouragement for everybody and myself is is to keep a growth mindset, keep a learning mindset, and even take the time to understand what learning even is. Because a lot of people, and when I talk to engineers and engineering leaders, because this was my role, my last role before I changed, my dream job was, oh, training is learning. And actually training is an activity. It's a really interesting activity that might eventually lead to learning, but learning is an outcome. And what is that outcome? A lasting change in behavior. And there are a lot of activities. There are a lot of things that you can do. You can read a book. You can go and try something. You can experiment, right? You can hack on something. You can take a training. There are so many different activities that might lead to a lasting change in your behavior, your ability to do something differently or think differently. But understanding what learning is, how it works, and then committing to being a learner and focusing on what activities are helping me actually have the lasting change that is going to have the impact that I want, that I desire. I would just encourage everybody to have and shift your mindset about what learning is and then commit to it and really lean into and become a lifelong learner. I think you will realize your full potential as a human in your own life and the contribution you make if you do that. I think it's critical. So that would be my final thought for folks.
Well, thank you, Chris. That is perfect final thought. Thank you again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciated it.
And